This is Sonic Ventures, a podcast celebrating the concept album format with Robert Goebel and Joël Tibbetts.
Sonic Ventures is an evolving series of discussions that explore concept albums from a variety of artists and genres. Our intent here is to have celebratory conversations of our personal experiences with selected works and the issues and themes surrounding concept albums.
Sometimes, we will be treading familiar waters concerning music interpretation and creation. Other times, we will venture into different places of thought, emotion, and expression. We invite you to join us on our sonic venture. Hello and welcome to the Sonic Ventures podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 1. This conversation was recorded on October 14th, 2022, and the album is Kate Bush's 1985 album, Hounds of Love. It is so exciting and thrilling to be doing a second season of the Sonic Ventures podcast with Rob. The first season was definitely us learning about what it would be like to not only have a podcast and have the conversations that we've had, but also how to sustain it and incorporate it into our lives. And so far, we've been pretty successful. So here we are with the second season. Now, this episode, I have very little to say because actually I'm bottlenecked by it. We talked about a lot of things. We went into a lot of areas, not only about the album itself, its psychology, its music, its background, but we also went into more of ourselves. We talked very deeply about a number of areas of our own lives. And this is one of the great things I've enjoyed about doing this podcast is just becoming more and more aware of the weave of not only expressing what I feel about the albums themselves, but also how that is so incorporated into my own life, my own narrative, my own perspective, and then sharing that with Rob. And the evolution of our relationship through the podcast has been very fulfilling for me. And I'm not only excited about this season, but seasons to come after it. So with the episode, as I said, I'm rather bottlenecked. So I'm not going to get into any particular takeaways right now. But what I do want to pass along to all of you is what we've done to the podcast in the beginning of this season. We've made some additions. Now, first and foremost is a website. We have a new website, and it's under sonicventurespodcast.com. And if you go there, you can get access to all of our episodes, past and current, and the future ones as well. And we've also introduced a blog into the mix. Right now, it's a little thin, but it will be filled very quickly with all of our little writings about varieties of things related to the podcast and music. Now, along with the website, we've also added Patreon. Now, whenever we do these episodes, there's a kind of format, albeit rather loose, but there's a format that we follow. And we've found that after we record a podcast, our post conversations have been very engaging. So what we want to do is bring you into those conversations as well. So we have something we're calling aftercasts, and aftercasts are those conversations. This being the first episode and the first time we're introducing it, the aftercast will be made available to everyone, but future aftercasts will only be accessible through Patreon supporters. The other thing we're adding through Patreon is two things. One is called a vignette, and the other one is called wildcards. So vignettes are shorter conversations that Rob and I will be having about very specific ideas or concepts or music. It depends on where we want to take that focus. And the other piece that we're adding to the Patreon page is something called wildcards. Now, the wildcards are not conversations. They're either Rob or I talking about something that we felt we needed to address, we wanted to bring up, we wanted to add into the mix. Maybe it didn't come up in the episode we were talking about. So these wildcards will also be available through Patreon. And finally, we would love to hear from you. As always, if there's any thoughts or questions that you may have, you can get in touch with us via email at sonicventurespodcast@gmail.com. Now, without further ado, here's our conversation about Kate Bush's Hounds of Love. Thanks for listening.
So we are live with Season 2, Episode 1,
Yes.
season opener, I guess, is what we call this. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the decision for this album has been like all the others. We just go from, episode to episode and share where we are with possibilities and then pick one. And so today we've chosen Kate Bush's Hounds of Love.
Yes.
And I'm personally very excited to talk about this album. I haven't had anyone to talk about this album with
Since
ever.
it was released.
Ever. So I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, and I can recall that although there is a zeitgeist around this album from Stranger Things,
Yes.
that our Season 1, which predates the Season Things airing, this was on your short list of albums when we initially came up with some albums that we were interested in.
Yeah.
And it's remained in the background as a possibility throughout the process.
There was probably about a dozen albums that I just quickly wrote off.
Yeah.
And this fell somewhere in the middle of that list. And honestly, like all the albums that were on that list, I didn't know how or when we would get to this album. So I'm really happy that we're starting this season off with it.
Yeah, I absolutely am too. For lots of reasons. Kate Bush herself as an artist is quite unique, and we've yet to feature female artists on the podcast, and so this is a great opportunity to get into what I think we both would agree is a truly exceptional album. And a truly exceptional artist of her time, and so it's really exciting to have been preparing to get to today for our discussion.
Yeah.
As always, our discussions here, unmapped, unoutlined, no previous discussions about this album were had as we led up to this. In fact, we put ourselves on sort of communication lockdown on anything Kate Bush or Kate Bush-esque.
Yeah, I think the closest we came was sharing the finds of the album. You came across the album somewhere.
Yeah, we exchanged some photos of the album jacket and sleeves, and so we could see some of the paratext of the album, which is I think probably to both of us is definitely part of the package of concept album is to actually what comes with it, and how it's presented. If you view that. If you view them as a work of art unto itself, like an expression of art,
Yeah.
So it was great. It's getting harder and harder to find.
That particular album, Hounds of Love?
In particular that album, because of course everyone's buying it.
Right.
So, hard to find, almost impossible to find used and on back order a lot for new.
Yeah.
So I literally only found it a couple of days ago in a shop, and I hemmed and hawed and ended up by not buying it.
But sent me a picture of it.
But sent you a picture of it to sort of say, hey, check it out. And
which I really appreciated.
Yeah, so that's the extent of our sharing, really, about this album, though, since we made the decision to...
exactly. And as we've built up the chops to be able to do that, because I know early on it was a little rough to not say anything. For sure. So we have a year of training in this.
That's right. We are professional withholders at this point. We've learned to subjugate our own impulses and with respect to sharing our thoughts and opinions on music with each other.
We're becoming model stoics.
Very much so.
So jumping into the album,
Yeah.
when was the first time that you heard this album in its entirety?
You know what? I've never heard the album in its entirety. I've only until we chose to start listening.
Okay.
I remember quite vividly 4 or 5 of the singles off the album and the videos that she did. So,
especially the videos.
Yeah.
Very vivid.
Yeah, and very cinematic, and each within the time period that those videos came out, for her, very much conceptually part in her mind when she wrote and produced the album. So there's a linkage between those, the album and the videos that goes beyond just I guess we need a video for this song.
There's a level of intentionality there that is very palpable,
right? And it comes from the composition of the songs themselves, with the cinematic and the visuals.
It's all woven together. Yeah. And actually, just as an aside, the video for Cloud Busting, that was actually the first time she did any acting.
Wow. Yeah.
And so when they cast Donald Sutherland specifically because he was such an amazing actor, and she said that it was so easy to act because he gave her everything that she needed in his own characterization of that character. So those videos for me too are a part of my childhood. Yeah, like my teens, my early teens. So when you first heard the album in its entirety.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a month ago.
Yeah, a month ago, 6 weeks ago.
Okay. That's interesting because for me, the first time I heard this entire album was a surprise to me. So I was studying music composition at SFU.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why I was there was not only because I wanted to learn about writing for acoustic instruments, but I wanted to learn about electronic music as well, because they had a really good, and as far as I know, they still do have a really good electroacoustic program there. So my prof, Martin Gottfried, one day we had this class, and it was just a lecture on what are the mainstream possibilities and options with electroacoustic music, because we were doing, for lack of a more accurate way to put it, very experimental, explorational stuff. And there was kind of an impetus not to do things that are, well, at that time were characterized as mainstream. So, but he did this class where he talked about examples of electroacoustic music and mainstream music. And the first album he put on, I can't remember which album it was, but it was Frank Zappa. Then he put on Steve Vai, Passion Warfare, and the track he played was Alien Water Kiss.
Okay.
And I knew what he was going to put on because that album had come out around the time, and I knew the album.
Yeah.
But then he put on this other track. And he said, okay, this track is from an album by Kate Bush. It's called Hounds of Love. And he put on, which one do you think he put on? Wow. That would be an example of what you could do in a kind of explorational, experimental way with electronic music.
Okay. I'm going to guess here as I go through my notes.
He's got lots of notes.
Yeah.
Oh, pages and he's got a page for every track.
I do.
We're going to be here for a while.
Waking the Witch.
Dead on.
Yeah.
That was exactly, well done.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
You go to Final Jeopardy.
I did, yes.
And so he put that on, and I couldn't believe that it was Kate Bush, because for me, Kate Bush was Running Up That Hill and Cloud Busting.
Right.
And so I just had to listen to the album, because I went up to him after the class, and I said, "Is the whole album like this?" And he said, "No, but it's really good." And I was like, "Okay." So I listened to the album, and it blew me away. I actually couldn't believe what I was hearing. And so after that, now and then I've listened to the album in its entirety, but this is the first time that I've listened to it, like I've said this for a number of albums we've done, with the intention of doing this podcast. So it's been a different experience to listen to this album for me.
So if I could take you back to that moment, then that when you went to listen to
my
the
hair's
album,
not long enough.
It's not, yeah. Yeah. I just wish I had the same amount of hair that I had back then. Yeah. If I could take you back to that moment when you first listened, and we'll certainly talk about this, but this album as a concept album is two quite distinct sides and two possibly distinct concepts.
Yeah.
And side one and side two.
Yeah.
As you went, and the song that he selected was from side two.
Yeah.
As you went and played the album the first time through, at what point were you aware of or not aware of like the two sides and the two sort of distinct concepts? And did you have an immediate attraction to one versus the other, or was there one that you identified with or didn't identify with initially?
Wow. That's an amazing question, to which I can only respond, I don't really remember it that way. I believe that first listening was more about the scale of everything sonically that got to me. So conceptually, I didn't really jump in like I did in the last month of really dissecting the ninth wave, dissecting the Hounds of Love suite. Certainly the themes of love were very clear. The moods and the characterizations of different aspects of love was clear to me. But I didn't know that it was two suites. I didn't even think about it when I listened to it as a concept album, because my head was in a different place at that time.
Right. And most likely you listened to it through CD, I'm going to assume.
Yes, although there was vinyl in the music room, which was great.
Okay.
Oh yeah, they had vinyl and CD. They had as far as I knew, they had every Frank Zappa album in there. But I listened to it on CD, and I certainly went through, what you do is I went through the booklet and that. But the conceptual aspect of it didn't really sink in, because where I was at that time was so much about the music, the how you put music together, and the
production
textures,
aspect of producing music and electronic music
and writing the music. So I wasn't that focused on the lyrical part, and so the conceptual part didn't really come through for me. Over the years, I've certainly come into a little bit more of that. But for me, I think the thing that really stuck with me with this album was how much I love that I don't know what her voice is. There was the thing that jumped out for me at that time, I think, was more of the timbral expansiveness of her voice, and how many moods and characters and personas, and her palette for vocalizing at that time was what really reached me. And then also the variety between the tracks, the instrumentation, a lot of the unhinging of the usual song tropes compositionally, also really stuck for me. But what I think really was the real thing was just the size of her voice, and how unrestricted it came across to me. And then just Waking the Witch itself was, honestly, Waking the Witch was the one I really focused on, because just of the use of very obvious electroacoustic techniques I was already kind of playing around with.
Right.
So I guess in a way, although I'm probably building this a little bit, it was probably the ninth wave that was reaching out to me more than the first side. So I guess this is a good way for me to go into some things. And the first part about this album that I find really interesting is that not only is both sides of the album two separate suites, supposedly two separate suites, is that they also present themselves in two different ways. So the first side has very much that convention of this is a song, this is a song, this is a song. But the second side, the ninth wave, and this is Kate Bush's words herself, it's a film.
Right.
She conceived it like a film. So what what the second side to me is more like is a mixture of sound design and music composed for a film. They're cues for scenes. And so going from track to track is not like going from song to song for me. Mm-hmm. So in our present conversation, and as you've taken me back in reflecting on that, I think the ninth wave probably was the thing that endeared itself to me much more quickly, because it was what surprised me the most.
Right.
So thank you for digging deep into the vault of my mind.
Yeah, there you go. I, reading what she said about the ninth wave, which is side 2 of the album, and when she talked about it being a film, then you got a couple different options in terms of how you conceptualize that or how you experience that. Do you listen to the music and experience it as lacking the visual, like this is an incomplete work without the film? Or do you experience it where it is a film that somehow manifests the images in your mind as you listen, so that the work is complete? It doesn't need the real visuals like from a film, but that it's sort of like it's the material that uses your own brain to generate the film as you listen.
Well, it's interesting you bring this up, because I feel like we've gone into the deep end of the conceptual pool really quickly, which is exciting to me, because for me, especially the ninth wave, I felt that what was happening for me was very much, it's complete. It doesn't need to be, someone doesn't need to shoot this.
Right, exactly.
But what I found too was that, especially with the ninth wave, more so with the ninth wave than Hounds of Love, I found myself not being able to characterize things and just feel them. Like there was no visual, there was no words.
Right.
And I think that takes me very quickly back to what I said about her voice having such scope and having such a wide palette, is that I feel that the thing that gets the hook in to me for the way that she sings is that she doesn't sing. She embodies. It's like it's coming out of all of her pores. Mm-hmm. It's not just coming out of her mouth. It's beaming out of her. And I don't mean to make that sound like a deification, but there's something about how she embodies what she's singing when she sings, even when she's not singing words. Like some of the amazing textural additions on some of the tracks of oohs and ahs, and even how she cleverly finds a way to sing like a dog, but it isn't quite like a woof or a bow wow, right? In the song Hounds of Love.
Sure.
That is what I think made the experience of this album for me many times just so viscerally intriguing that I couldn't put an image to it, or I couldn't put words to what I was hearing.
Well, speaking to that that idea that she's not singing but she's emoting, or she's coloring with voice, or when you consider how she recorded this album, right? Mm-hmm. She didn't go into a vocal booth to sing the track. No. Right. In if you can imagine her sitting in the studio, and she used the Fairlight, right? And which gives her a palette where the keyboard just really becomes the tactile execution of fingering notes from the palette. That in the same way that she pieced things together and built things sonically, sitting there probably in front of the mic, she was able to, I think, conceptually use her voice in the same way she was using the Fairlight, right? Well,
and she was, as much as I was able to, and we've talked about how much we don't want to expose ourselves to with the narratives sometimes of these albums. I was left with an understanding that her last album, she didn't want to do it the same way she did the last album. So I think that there was a number of things that were done out of the usual studio context. and that they captured and preserved and then took it in the studio and incorporated them.
Right.
So I think that in a way, to a certain degree, it reminded me a little bit of 2112, that there was something else at stake in the album for her because of of how the previous album was received. So with Rush, I mean, it's different. Rush was thinking they're done, but in this case, I feel that what you're saying brings me to think that the Fairlight is a huge piece of this album, a massive piece of this album. And I actually did the time to learn more about Fairlights. And it was so interesting, so amazing piece of technology. And I could see why she would be so drawn to it, because it doesn't tell you what to do. The technology basically says, what do you want me to do? And I find that when I went out of my way too to listen to some really amazing radio interviews with her about making this album. And even the short moments she would talk about the Fairlight, it was very interesting. It sounded like she was given an opportunity, or she was given a means to express herself where there was things in the way that probably were there before that wouldn't be there with the Fairlight. And so it's almost like, this might be a little too far, but the Fairlight was kind of had an open palette as much as she does.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. And she was, not only was she composing with her voice like she was composing with the Fairlight, but she also used the Fairlight to compose with her voice, right?
Yeah.
So like she could, the Fairlight could take a sample or an element of her voice, and she could then play her own voice, manipulate her own voice through the Fairlight.
And she went even so far to use a lot of the parameters that were in the Fairlight, like the rhythm to Running Up the Hill was one of the default rhythms. It was in there.
Nice.
And that's how Running Up the Hill started, was with that rhythm. So the importance of that instrument, Fairlight, was huge in the creation of this album. And I think that it also, in one interview I saw with a music prof, she was saying that this album probably demonstrates what the Fairlight is. It's probably the most unencumbered presentation of what the Fairlight is capable of doing.
Right. So a great product demo for NOM. NOM 83 or 85 or
was there a NOM then?
Actually there was.
Okay.
Because I remember being very envious of some guy from
some music store you used to go to?
Yeah, the music store.
Do all of us have that story?
We have. We're probably the same envy. We probably have the exact same story at the Annex, where at the time it was Long and McQuaid, I believe, had a split off a satellite location where all the new MIDI and latest synth gear was.
So the Fairlight would have been there.
Well, more importantly, as it relates to the NAMM story, there was a photo of the big, tall, skinny, geeky guy that was part of that company at the time at NAMM in like 84 or 85 with Eddie Van Halen. And so that
would have been close to though before they let it go, because it was just too the Fairlights were made by hand.
Right.
They had to hand burn the boards.
Do you know how many there were made in production? Do you know how many?
I don't remember that number, but I remember them saying that the cost of the Fairlight was the same cost of a house at that time.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a huge clunky piece of equipment, but even the computer screen would demonstrate waveforms in 3D.
Wow.
Just amazing design. And it came out of Australia, which surprised everybody. Nobody expected some piece of technology like that coming out of Australia, but in the end they couldn't sustain it because the overhead and the hours to build them just were not cost effective. But the person who actually introduced the Fairlight to Kate Bush was Peter Gabriel.
Right.
So one of those. So what? So
Peter Gabriel. That's humor.
Right.
I bringing humor to the podcast. Enjoy. Go ahead, sir.
He was the one they actually first presented the Fairlight to.
Yeah.
They took it over. One of the two that helped design it, I'm afraid I can't remember their names right now, took it directly to Peter Gabriel. And Peter Gabriel had his hands on it for a week, and he loved it. And in that time, he also showed it to Kate Bush. And then she was like
the second person, maybe, if I remember.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And so I feel that her use of it on this album really demonstrates not only her capacity with vocals, but just also how she conceives of the presence of a song that she's working on. And she went so far. I don't know if you discovered this, but there's a helicopter sound in this album.
Yes.
Do you know where it's from?
It's Pink Floyd, The Wall.
That's
think.
right.
Yeah.
And it's not like she couldn't ask David Gilmour because, well, he discovered her. But she went so far as to want a really good helicopter sound. And she said we couldn't find a good one. And the best one I'd heard was on The Wall.
Yeah.
So she asked to use it.
Yeah, there's helicopters. There's a jet sound, sound and lots of stuff.
So
there,
what I found really intriguing for me in this deep dive and listen to this album was learning about how much she's aware of in terms of putting together the song, the accuracy of what sound is going to go where, and even the intuitive trust factor.
Yeah.
So on the track Hello Earth, which is an amazing example of how you can blow open the doors on how you structure a song. There's two choral moments, and she had written the kind of AA parts of that song. And she knew that there were these two holes that had to be filled. And she knew the texture, or she knew the quality that she wanted. So she looked for it. And she tried to write all these choral parts, but she said they never quite worked. And she was trying to emulate what she'd heard in this Herzog film of this choral piece. I didn't write the name down for the actual piece. It'll come later.
Okay.
And but in the end, she just said, "Well, this is the right choral sound." So she went out of her way to find out if they could use it, and they could. So she has such a demonstration in this album, I think, of her understanding of what's going on and her openness to her intuition and crafting it.
Well, and you also have that factor of getting a new piece of hardware or technology, and that is wide open in terms of your understanding of it and learning of it, and how that fuels how the exploration of that and the creativity of exploring that fuels the imagination and drives artistic output. It's incredibly creative, and I can imagine the momentum that would have come from digging into that and finding and discovering things. One of the things about this album that reminds me of some of the albums that we've talked about is that this was workshopped. This was built over time in her studio, at the desk, bringing these things together. And then as she was attempting to fill in the holes and sort of bring other people into the music, she did go out and look for people and look for collaborators to come in and be a part of what she did. But one of the luxuries that she had was access and control to means of production in terms of the
Yes.
and so something really important in art, to be able to get an album like this isn't you book a studio and you walk in and in 2 weeks you have your album. There's a privilege that comes from having access,
Right.
and time, and she'd carved out time and secured access, and then her own incredible creativity, built these songs and these tracks over time. And then she had the, we'll call it the clout and the networking cachet to bring in the people to help her finish the tracks. And you do read of how the tracks changed as they brought people in, and how they, there was still that element of surprise and being able to build off of and what was laid down. So, it's as I considered that process, I thought a lot of Dark Side of the Moon, and how long they had to work that up on the road, right? And then to work that up in the studio, sort of in parallel, and how unique, but how similar that process to those two monumental albums were, and then of course, as soon as you have David Gilmour in the mix as a friend, possible lover, but certainly very in sort of the My Fair Lady Victorian tradition of such, very very interesting parallel there. But it's something that is quite exciting when you think about it, because even with today's technology sort of revolution, and the things that used to keep people from being able to make an album like this are much more readily available. So you're not blocked out of a studio. You have time in your bedroom, in your studio, in your home, to similarly explore where your mind can go, and there's kids out there and people out there that are on similar journeys right now, and that's really exciting to me to sort of think about that. Yeah. But there would have been a gap between what was possible that way with what Kate Bush did, with access to all that, and then people not having access for quite a period of time. And so, it makes me smile to think about all the other Kate Bushes that are now able to be this, and especially with her resurgence in popularity, what sort of inspiration that's going to have to drive people to it.
It's interesting you say that, because I was thinking about that in terms of specifically how she sings, and how there's on the one hand that we have access to this technology, there's also what's the word I'm looking for? There's kind of a with the access comes a lot of defaults, comes a lot of settings that are done. This is production ready.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, yes, for sure, it's great. More people have access. But at the same time, what about pushing the boundaries? How do you do that? And someone like Kate Bush is a great example of it. Just in her voice, without the Fairlight, just the way that she sings, just the way she conceives of vocal parts and how to add to them. One thing that I noted on this album especially was when there were many iterations of her voice, but they would have different reverberant and textural qualities. Instead of normalizing, there was there's so many shades in the vocalizations that are there, whether they are produced through the Fairlight or she's done them in the studio through a mic herself. I just found that there was no this is my voice, this is the curation of my voice, and this is what I want you to hear. There's so much being exposed in her voice on this album. And that's why I started off by talking about these characters or personas. And I feel that if it what put a smile on my face is if it would be inspirational for vocalists, well, any musicians, but vocalists, just to think, well, maybe I don't have to sing that way, the way that I've been singing. Maybe I can sing this way, or I can do it this way, or maybe if I try to wail like some injured person or animal, there's something really great that might come out of that.
Right. I'm right on this with you in terms of what I hope this inspires for today's generation, especially young and female singers, is that right now that world seems to be dominated by a certain kind of vocal affectation, right? And so you'll hear people singing in affectations, and they may have like a selection of like a drop down menu of 3, right? But they're very specific affectations. A lot of them are very similar, whether it's that breathy little girl thing or the sort of the quirky pitch thing, or the different. We could identify them.
And I would say that Billie Eilish coming into the scene. And then Kate Bush, it's an interesting...
Well, I'm interested to see what Billie Eilish does after now maybe hearing Kate Bush, because Kate Bush...
I don't know if she has or hasn't heard her, though.
Well...
That's the only thing.
Yeah, I mean...
That's one thing.
I'm going to assume that I'm imagining an influence from her resurgence and that it filtering through.
Yeah.
Kate Bush has... there's elements of some of those vocal affectations on her tracks, but she's got like 1,000 of them.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And they're less about affectation and more about, I want this color here, right? I want to do this thing or explore this thing, and so that's what I'm hoping, that it actually opens up more possibility and it lets people
I'm with you on
transcend away from that very almost tropey affectation that is kind of in vogue right now with a lot of young singers.
Yeah. But there's always vogue. There's always a current way of doing something that, I mean, even when I listened to an interview with David Gilmour, and he was asked about discovering Kate Bush and what that was like. And the story is so interesting because he said that he heard her and he found out about her because of a friend's girlfriend or sister, I think it was. Anyways, what he did though is he put her in the studio as though she was already had a reputation and was pro. He invested in her and didn't make demos. They made masters.
Right.
And then he brought that to the record company and said, would you like to take her on and do an album? I said, yes. So they take her on, and after a little while, they come back to him and say, yeah, we don't want to do this. And he said, well, why not? And they said, because it's not working out. It doesn't sound right. And when David Gilmour listened to what they did, he said, well, you don't know how to work with her. Why don't you use the same engineer producer I had her with before? And they said, we don't like him.
Yeah.
And then David Gilmour said, that doesn't matter. So he had to really advocate for her.
Yeah.
Because the label, that institution or that organization didn't know what to do with it. And so I think that the other piece about going back to a little bit about having people having more access to do things on their own, let's say, is then you can show it. At least you can present it as it is instead of it having to work through the treadmill of justification of that apparatus of the music industry or a certain label.
Yeah.
And I too smile upon that if that that brings things into giving a lot more opportunities and a lot more genuine experiences to people who want to sing and want to sing what they feel, how they feel it. But then even more so, which you've already we've alluded to a bit, you especially, is that, and to invest in an experiment,
right?
And invest in an exploration, not invest in a certified outcome,
right?
And that is the other thing about Kate Bush is kind of revival that's really interesting to me, is that I didn't know if I wanted to see the Stranger Things moment. I actually spent 2 weeks pondering it. Do I not find out, because I don't watch Stranger Things. I don't watch Netflix and TV and that. So I thought, well, if I watch this, how will it color this experience? And then in the end, I thought, this is actually a really significant moment. Maybe I should get in a little bit more information. So I watched the scene that the song is in. And I was fascinated by how little of the song is actually there.
Right.
And not only when it's there, it's covered with added orchestration to, I imagine what I thought the reasoning behind that was to add to the drama of the scene. But you do not actually really hear the whole song, because what I thought going into it was that they play the whole song and it's just the song and it's just these images. No, not at all, actually.
No.
So I guess you could say that I haven't come to a decision on this, but on this with what the how can I put that? Well, what the implications of this is. But it was intriguing to me that it took very little for it to actually have the resurgence that it's had. It just has to be there a little bit, and all of a sudden it just booms out.
Right. Well, it suggested, I think, in terms of its use in the film, in the Stranger Things, what I appreciated most about it was the film itself, or the visuals of the show itself, weren't trying to be the song, right?
No.
And what was trying to be shown was that this song became this girl's oral talisman.
Exactly.
And
perfect
so
word for it.
It had meaning and significance to her on a personal level, of which that mystery is not addressed, and you shouldn't be necessarily. I mean, you can, but to try and derive what that meaning to her was. Or you accept it on its face, that this was a song that had some sort of deep emotional resonance within her life and within her psychology, and she chose that as
it's
her
very
talisman.
clear,
right? Yeah,
because it pulls her out of that other realm that she's in.
Exactly. So it's her grounded in this world, but connected to the psyche element. So what I liked that the film didn't try and answer the significance of what that exact significance was for the character, or try and sell us on that as the experience of the song to us.
Right. And that's fair. And I also admit, like I said, I only watched the scene.
Yeah.
I have no other context. I have no idea. But for me, it was how intriguing it is that all it takes is a little bit of that song.
Well, and I'm going to build on that
Please.
just a little bit too. So great. Kate Bush has had an explosion of interest and a resurgence of popularity, and people are listening to her music, or at least they're putting it on their playlists, and she's getting airplay. Most of the press and most of the articles I've read about how wonderful this is, all they focus on is, how much money did she make?
Yeah.
How
numbers.
Isn't it amazing that Kate Bush has made $2.5 million off of this in this time period? Or, and what I've not read is people talking about the music.
Yeah.
Like all this press and all this focus and all this attention and everyone playing, no conversations about the music itself in the press. I can only hope somebody's having those conversations.
Well, we are.
We are, yeah. We're right in that demographic,
I guess we are.
Yeah, 50-year-old white guys, beautiful. But
I'll leave that with you.
Yeah. That said, yeah, we're I like to hope that people are having that discussion, but I do find that little, I don't want to say it irony, but there's that sort of element of, here we have this resurgence of something, and is this going to be forgotten next week when, it almost got forgotten when the Master of Puppets moment in the same series came out, and there was a resurgence for young Metallica, today's Zillennials or whatever they're called, were suddenly found Metallica, Master of Puppets, and so suddenly the conversation moved away from Kate Bush and back on the money, how much Metallica made and how many more T-shirts they sold. And isn't it interesting that now Gen Z is wearing Metallica shirts?
Well, there's been some other iterations of that earlier on. There's always a presence of nostalgia. There's always some, this is in fashion again, but not to spend too much time on the numbers issue, because I don't want us to spend too much time on the numbers. But I think that to me, it didn't surprise me, because that is the default of these larger institutionalized thinking processes. And that earlier on I was talking about investing in experimentation, exploration instead of outcomes. That's where the outcomes are. They're about numbers. Right.
But that's interesting too, because like you noted and like you compared to 2112, Kate Bush had a disappointing sales of the album prior to this.
Was Dreams?
Yeah. And she both creatively, she was frustrated with it, and I think the record company was frustrated a little bit economically. And this was, although this was experimental, and she had somehow managed to secure the means of production and the time to put this out, it ultimately was about the numbers for the record company at the end. Like the success of this that allowed Kate Bush to make an album after this.
Because they're trying to make their money back.
Sure.
And then a profit.
Absolutely. But it is interesting that, what we got was the artistic product. We got this wonderful product that also just happened to be a success. And thankfully, allowed her to continue to be a viable artist for many, many years.
On her own terms.
Yeah. Yeah, which Rush did, right?
Yes, and speaking of numbers, just as an aside, she owns all the rights to this stuff. So at least we can be mildly confident that if anyone's getting their due numbers, it's her.
Yeah, very good.
So. But going to this album, there's a number of things about it that are quite stunning for me. And one of the things is, apart from the fact that the two suites exist the way they do, one way that I was experiencing the album in its entirety was that the first suite, Hounds of Love, was kind of this surface narrative, a series of narratives about love.
Okay.
And each song doesn't go into the nature or the qualities of human love in very conventional or simplistic ways. So the first track, Running Up That Hill, which actually she wanted it to be called A Deal with God, but the record label said if you put God in the title, it's not going to be played in these places in Australia and the United States and that.
Yeah.
So that song is about a wish that cannot be fulfilled. Love between a man and a woman, and being able to reverse the roles to see which each other experiences. And then you have the Hounds of Love, which is actually based out of kind of a horror theme perspective on the fear of allowing love to catch you,
right,
and potentially consume you.
In particular from a female point of view.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you've got, what's the next one? The Big Sky.
Big Sky.
Which for me was just a personification of that youthful love of experience, very open, the not being afraid of your imagination, whereas the previous track, the imagination comes in there. And then you've got Mother Stands for Comfort, which is about a murderer and his relationship with his mother, which is not how the track first appeared to me when I was listening to it. And then you've got Cloud Busting, which is about Peter Reich and Wilhelm Reich's relationship, father and son relationship, and a very unusual kind of relationship. So they're kind of like these, the surface, in a sense, of the wakeful experience of relational love with other human beings. But then for me, the second side was like this plunge into the unconscious, which Kate Bush actually said that a lot of the ninth wave was her fears. She used her fears to create a lot of those tracks. And just how the ninth wave also has this multi-dimensional view of being, there's that being alone in the ocean, the terror of that, or the isolation of that. And then when you get to Hello Earth, where you have this broader perspective of looking down at the earth. So I found that this, in a simple way, side A and B are like the surface and then a plunge. But then within those two realms, there's a lot of depth.
Right. Yeah. For me, I would agree with your general take on the two sides that way. Yeah. Like, side two has, it sort of, for me, side two functions, on feeling and on visualization as I listen, right? Yeah. And it functions much more homogeneous as an experience. So like I in many ways feel side two was written for me, right? To experience as an arc. I can feel that arc.
Oh yeah.
And that journey within side two. Side one, I think, is more an exploration of psyche, and that you talk about this surface narrative or the narrative of each song, talking about love, and what I found, my arc through that was sort of an evolving revealing of her psyche and her own issues with being a woman. Mm-hmm. And the dichotomy between woman and child, and gender, man and woman, and so as I read through the performance of that side, I just saw little revelations of psyche, and that drama sort of that arc played out for me. So, for example, just to jump right into the middle of it, Mother for me was in my narrative through line of that suite was more about her resisting and dealing with the end product of what happens when a girl loves a guy and she turns into a mother that becomes the mother to a guy. And and as the mother to a male that she is that she fears, like that she feared. There's elements of sort of fearfulness or retreat from being partnered with a guy, from being partnered with a male persona, or being captured by a male persona. Yet as a mother produces the male persona, and so this the murderer is sort of like the extreme bad side of male, of which the mother's complicit in. And I find that what she's dealing with there is the potential of being a mother, and with that and what she would lose of self to be a mother that then perpetuates a son, that then goes on to be something that she would have been fearful of. So I saw the whole arc of all those songs in relationship to her sort of refusal to grow up into a into a sexual being within a sexual relationship with a man, and retreating into a childhood persona from that, and struggling with desire for that at the same time. I could break it down sort of song per song and get into some detail there, but for me, it was a part of a larger narrative track of sort of her struggles within that. And so what I saw her doing in those songs is that she sang in persona, and but those so. And those personas were revealed still that struggle. So like in Cloud Busting, she sings in the persona of a boy, a young boy, that's right, with an idealized father, and there's this sort of, which brings us back to the sort of gender swap suggested in the first song, right? Exactly. Yeah. So the bookend, it starts with this wish, this devil's bargain or deal with God.
Actually, it's a deal with the God. Yeah. And she actually talked a little bit about, should she make it a deal with the devil or with God? Which is interesting.
Yeah, I remember reading that, which is why I threw that line in there. But it is that interesting bookend, is that at the end of the suite, she does sort of reframe herself as the boy, and with an idealized father, with sort of this sort of authoritarian, the alchemical idealized father, it's fighting against this authoritarian masculinity. Okay. So I found when she retreated into that identity, she was she no longer had to answer the question of a girl facing her growing sexuality, right? There was no girl and sexual tension with the father or anything Freudian, that may have been suggested if she had remained in that persona. But I found it sort of like as a way to escape that question of being pursued by love, by growing up in as a sexual being, leaving her childhood. So for me, like something like Cloud Busting, what I love about Cloud Busting, she's still articulating that same struggle with somebody, as in, you don't see me, but the me she is the silly me, right? It's and it's the euphoric child with her, the clouds, to the point where as she's celebrating that identity and retreating into that, she's speaking in childhood tongues, she's blah, blah, blah. She's making, this joyous childhood sort of noise, saying, this is what's behind this. I'm this, I'm not just the woman that's in a relationship here.
It's interesting we're talking about Cloud Busting, because I read A Book of Dreams.
Yes.
And I've wanted to read it for many years. So doing this podcast, there was no question. Now I
you're going to have to jump in, right?
And I have to say that what you've just kind of outlined is certainly come up for me. I have to admit that with this album, I found myself at times, is this what she's trying to put across, or is it this? I found that there was a multiplicity of possibilities that would come to me. And as I was reading A Book of Dreams and listening to this album, that got more complicated.
Yeah.
Because there's a specific... There's a specific thing about Book of Dreams that comes across for me that I don't know. I know that when I've heard what I did hear her say about the book there's very little. I don't really know what captivated her about the book, but there's a lot of things that happen in the whole album that are in that book. Like first and foremost, the blending of conscious and unconscious, the blending of the past, the present, like you were speaking about idealized views,
Right.
retreating from what you're afraid of, retreating from what happened and not acknowledging it.
Right.
So as I was reading A Book of Dreams, I actually found it more difficult to say, this is what it is. And I'm not saying that that's what you're saying.
No, it's
But-
yeah, no, but I do agree with that notion. I mean, like, as you start to play around with this, right? You know, the perspective that you formulate, or the journey that you sort of take in trying to untangle, you know, is always about perspective and trying to piece together those story elements that help you, you know, or unify your experience of
Right.
something. But they're not definitive, right? By
No,
any means.
But I think that when I was talking about, when you were talking about, if I got it right,
Yeah.
because is that first suite for me was, I think we're both talking about this in the same way. Like, we're talking about the same thing. So the idea of surface, I use that word, but I don't mean it to say that it's vacuous.
No,
it's not
yeah,
true.
no, I get that.
It's like
just,
a gateway.
yeah,
And then when we go into the ninth wave, we go in to the deep, deep places of the unconscious,
right,
as they're often referred to. So the bit about that first track,
yeah,
and she's singing about being in the water alone, and all she wants to do is sleep.
right,
And for me, what was happening for me was the nature and the narratives of love that we've just gone through you start to see roots of them, deep roots, that you go so deep that polarizations of experience start to dissipate. They start to just kind of melt together. And so there is actually, for me, in the ninth wave was the real place in listening to this album where I couldn't necessarily come up with the thoughts or even the images to personify what I was feeling in those moments. And even when she's singing about getting out of the water, the ice.
yeah,
And as she's singing about it, eventually she's saying, it's me. There's this, I'm very much in agreement with you that there is this, we're listening, I feel as well, if this is what one of the things you were saying, is that this is her process. These are her, let's call them issues or concerns, desires, passions, her experience. And when I get to Jig of Life, Hello Earth, she starts to become more of a plurality.
right. There's a transcendence there.
Yeah,
right?
she becomes bigger.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the interesting thing about multiple listens.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is for you, but like sometimes I'll listen to a whole album and then I listen to it again and suddenly the end is just plump in the beginning somehow all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And so I start to make these connections where her in running up that hill asking to share to be able to see each other's perspectives is, to me, is not necessarily saying I want to see the other side. It's I want to see what I think is the other side, but is actually in me. So there is a boy in Kate Bush.
Right.
There's a murderer in Kate Bush.
Yeah.
And forgive me, Kate, but there's all of these characters and these personas in her. And so for me, I felt that, and I don't know if this was her intention, but the conception of love has no polarization. It has no entrenched perspective.
Right.
We're the ones who are struggling with what we do with love. Love is not doing that to us. Love isn't making us terrified of things coming out of the trees and consuming us. Love isn't going out and finding the witches and then drowning them. We're doing that. We're trying to learn how to contend with love. Because in the other piece to it too is the last track for me, which actually I find very uncomfortable. I want to talk about it a little bit because I found it a very interesting experience for me. She puts a bow. It's just like the end of the wall. There's this very simple bow,
right,
to tie it all together, and like in the wall, for me anyways, that last piece is saying, look, life is poetic. There's a beautiful song that resonates through life at all times if you're willing to listen to it. And it's shared. And I found that at the end of this album, even though it was very jarring in the way the track starts, after coming out of Hello Earth, I actually got to a point where I'd get to the end of Hello Earth and I would pause. And I would wait until I was ready to start the last track, mostly because of the musical approach. There's this bow about, I'm just going to tell all these people that I love them.
Right.
That they're whoever they are. And this whole idea too of, but then I'm meandering a little bit here, but even that idea of everyone get out of the water, get out of the water, get out of the water. To me, that has such a spin of interpretations and possibilities. But for me, what I come to at the end of this album is that the love piece is not defined by any of this.
Right.
All of these experiences, all of these narratives are human beings learning about love, but none of it defines it.
Yeah, I don't. I can take that in, and I hear that and I feel that, and I wasn't so sure that it's love itself that she was scared of. I think it was in that first suite. I think it's literally leaving the child, growing up from being a child. And I'll preface this by sort of saying the things that are in our psyche, the things that we're working out in therapy, the things that are in our dreams, come from when we were children. That's the genesis of them, and they have we personify them and create our child narratives to them. Our monsters are in the trees, right? Our monsters are under the bed. Even when we turn them into metaphor or analogy as children. And as a child, your identity as a child, and often when as adults we talk about ourselves, we still have that identity of ourselves as that person, as that child. Yep. And when Kate Bush as she becomes and is sort of leaving the childhood realm and becoming a woman, of course, one of the elements of adulthood is the added complexity of the sexual dynamic with a partner and an adult partner, and its impact on psyche and identity and self and the loss of the child. And so you see the narrative evolving through that. It gets framed as a fear of love, but it's really the fear of losing that child, which is why I say, when you get to something like The Big Sky, it was her sort of reclaiming and celebrating the child as part of her adult self as well. Yeah. I'm going to be silly. I was silly. I am silly. I'm gonna look at shapes in the cloud, and I'm gonna scream and dance and do twirls in the grass, and that's who I am here, and I'm gonna celebrate that. This is sort of like a childhood incantation of reclaiming my childhood self. And so I saw that. Yes, it's exploring love. But love really is just an element in a larger arc of just sort of like growing up.
I see what you're saying,
yeah.
and I don't know if we have enough time
Yeah,
to go into this, because there's definitely there's places where we're going to break away from each other, I think, in this.
Possibly.
Yeah,
And
I think so.
I mean, I certainly did a bit of a Jungian thing when I looked at that first, and I broke each song down into sort of a different type of narrative that sort of fit on those lines. And so, I could talk about different things in those, but I am interested in what you said about the second suite, and I'm really interested in going there, because what I found is once we get to that second suite, after we've gone through this sort of journey on side one, it's like she talks about isolation and going into the water. And I thought about going into a sensory deprivation tank, which is essentially what she's describing here, especially coming out of cloud busting, which is, has its own sort of, we'll call it linkage to alternative therapies and the sort of things like that kind of therapy.
Body therapy, especially.
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought that's what she did. And when you described earlier in this conversation about the roots growing from that, where I think the first one is more of a told narrative that's happening higher in the consciousness, like it's sort of like as narrative that certainly has an ability to be drilled into psyche, that then the second side is psyche unleashed, right?
Yeah.
So then some of that same drama or some of the same narrative does play out in that psyche until it gets to that point where it just becomes its own explosive element of creation. And so you have this amazing experience that sort of comes at you from and maybe inspired by side one, but just has its complete own embodiment in my psyche as I'm listening to it. And so, like I think you described, I experienced side two. Side two was an experience for me. Side one was Apollo. I was engaged with interactive thinking of it. I was engaged in my brain of it, where side two was something that somehow animated imagination and took over. I was not thinking it. I was just feeling it.
It's very, but I think that goes back to what I was talking about with love.
Okay.
And that's why I'm saying that this is probably one of those evolving pieces of our relationship and conversations.
Sure.
Is that if you think that love is something extra and that it's only in the human experience, then I would be much more likely to give 100% stamp to what you said. I think, because I think that I have a lot of questions and I have a lot of things I want to repeat. So for the sake of the people listening, we won't do that today.
Yeah.
But I think that what came out of this for me was a human being contending with the difference between putting your garden in the world and putting your world in the garden. How the hell do you explain everything in a piece of everything?
Yeah.
And so with my, as it's classically called, worldview, which has its own problems, even saying worldview, but I think that what I came away from in this album was honestly my own pieces of my own narrative with love.
Interesting.
And when I was reading A Book of Dreams, there's a very particular quality to that book of, it's never said. For me, this is what came out of the book. And it's never said, but there's an experimental, explorational quality to life that doesn't turn off. It doesn't end. And of course, I'm speaking from my view. I'm speaking from reading this book.
Sure.
But the story in A Book of Dreams is so porous, how youth and adulthood, dreams and waking life, imagination and reason are so swimmy. It acknowledges that all the way through, that if I had the opportunity to meet Kate Bush, I probably would want to spend a lot of time, if it was possible, to talk about what happened to you reading that book. Because if you feel that life is that porous, I think a person has to ask themselves, how do I keep going with such flexibility in terms of how I'm interpreting things, but then also what I do and what kind of influence it has. So for me, with this album and what you've talked about with her relationship with her own childhood, if I can sum it up like that,
Sure.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or just the evolution of a human being from childhood into adulthood. I think you can hit a lot of the numbers with this.
Yeah.
But what I feel comes out compositionally for me is what happens in Hello Earth.
Okay.
Is that whole thing with that choral piece coming in twice, that back and forth. There was a few times where I felt like, by way of analogy, it was kind of like the music of the spheres.
Mm-hmm.
There's just this chorus singing, and it's got this feeling of permeating everything, but then you can't really grasp it. And so when I would come to the end of Hello Earth, it ends with that choral quality. It's very gentle, it's very soothing, it's very haunting as well. And then suddenly the last track comes in, and it's got this pep to it, and it's got this kind of, childlike quality to it.
Yeah.
But what she's saying lyrically is, I need to tell these people that I love them. But I feel like that last track is a bow to keep going on.
Right.
But the simple piece of it is you just have to express that you love somebody or you love something. You have to do that. Right. You have to experiment with that. You have to explore that.
How much did you pause and harken back to an old discussion we had on animals and the function of pigs on the wing?
An old discussion we had, not here
on the podcast, but an off mic discussion.
I can't call it up in my mind right now.
Yeah, well, just in terms of the function of pigs on the wing. Right. Bookending.
Oh, right. That thing
animals.
I did. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, right.
Right.
I offered up in our music chat group the first track and last track of Animals.
Right.
And just to see how they're similar and different.
Yeah. And I'd written an essay on animals as well that sort of gets to Pigs on the Wind and says, here's the point. And, similarly, that sort of like, that restating of love and but not without its cautions.
Right. You're still going to get shit on.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And just, but also, bookending or completing the circle of animals of the song. And in many ways, this completes the circle here, and it has that same function, right?
Very much so.
So you're right back to go into the journey again, which is part of the experience of repeat listening. You get to experience this sort of coming together or concluding element that then leads back into the beginning.
All I wanted was a 1 minute drone. I'm cutting into songwriting choices, but that way that Hello Earth ends, it's so good, and it's so soft, and it's so gentle, and it's so deep, and then and that's why I would stop it, because I had to digest what I couldn't even put words to, and then suddenly there's these very sharp.
It's abrupt.
It's very abrupt.
It's like when they drop in the da 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 right at the end of the. It's like, hold on, what? I wasn't like that. It's over. Stop. Yeah, couldn't we have just had that sort of didgeridoo sounding, electronic wave that was part of the earlier part of it? Like this.
Well, there is actually they had a didgeridoo player.
Well, I'm sure they did, but there was that point when you can actually hear when they emulated on the Fairlight.
Yeah.
You can hear the envelope being manipulated, and you can actually on a couple places you can actually catch the passing of the notes, right? As the notes
kind of go.
You can just it's like
But so that's why I feel that right now. I feel that last track evokes a little bit of, love.
Yeah.
But there's still a pullback.
Yeah.
Because the ninth wave in the poem.
Yeah.
And in the song Hello Earth, spoken in German.
Yes.
Which is probably, I believe, referencing Wilhelm Reich.
Yeah.
And then there's also music material from a couple tracks in Hello Earth, like reorchestrated a bit.
Yeah.
Is saying there's light in that dark.
Yeah.
So what would that be? What would that be? Why is it that I wake up in the morning, I open my eyes, and there's light.
Right.
The world is running around and doing its things, and I'm doing my stuff. And then I go to sleep. And it's all about, you mentioned sensory deprivation tank. Mm-hmm. Sleeping is definitely akin to that. And for those of us like myself who wear earplugs at night, it's beautiful. But you go into that dark, how could there be light there?
Well, yeah, but that's the one thing that you forget. The light is her, right?
Is it?
Well, in the image of her in the tank, the light is the beacon on her life vest.
Is it?
Right? Well...
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
It complicates in the same way you go from being on Earth to being, looking at something orbiting to being in orbit and blocking out Earth. There is a polar flip on that. So but you can look at. I looked at that a little bit as the self retreating into the nothing, right? So like if you get in this sort of Heideggerian sort of idea of the finitude is revealed as the nothing consumes everything and everything but you is sort of retreating from you,
right?
That you become you. And recognizing your finiteness or your finitude in the retreat of all other things. And
your concept of self.
And that becomes that existential moment of transcendence when you basically, sort of arc into the clearing of being and the unique quality of being is revealed through the acknowledgement of finitude in the retreat of all things, basically. And
I would like to add to that Krishnamurti words that people are not afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of losing what they know. So for me, that last track poses a question for me as to what you're referring to as a retreat, if I understood it right, could be viewed to me as a little bit of a resistance to what was shown through that process. Because if you're shown something that is going to upend everything you know or believe about life, will you accept it or will you just pull back from it?
Well, for me, that doesn't happen at the end. It happens at the beginning, right? Okay. That's the mechanism that unleashes once herself is isolated within the water, you know, and then that moment of revelation and then creates this moment of transcendence and this explosion of idea, right?
Which is fair, but at the same time, couldn't it the desire to make a deal with God?
Okay.
The desire to make a deal with God. Mm-hmm. That's the deal you want to make. Is you want to know what one other person is experiencing. Just one other person. If you could make a deal with God,
right?
If you believed in God and you want to make a deal with God, it's just this other person,
right? Well, but that's a thing, right? Because part of the, we'll call it the loneliness of being, right? If being is the question of not just like, you know, your finitude, but also your uniqueness of experience. Like, is my experience of being, different than your experience of being at its fundamental, like that moment of recognition or that moment. Right,
but what is fundamental? How do we know what fundamental is?
Well, fundamental is depending upon the mechanism through which you get there.
Oh, okay.
For me, the fundamental thing was at that point when, in a Heidegger sense, when you recognize yourself in isolation of all other things, being part of that. So like that.
So it's kind of like it's a Euclid proposition.
Explain.
Well, like, Euclid saying, okay, a point is a point because I've decided it's a point. And then a line is a line because it's between 2 points. And then, you know, these are all the propositions of Euclid around mathematics, so that you build your fundamental.
I look at it more as like a thought experience, in the sense that, you know, like how do you define the self, but for the idea of, well, if you can imagine every other thing but yourself retreating and being consumed by nothingness, what's left is yourself.
Right, but you have to conceive that nothingness exists.
You have to be able to conceptualize it for sure. And if you can't, but nothingness isn't sort of in a philosophical sense that there's nothing,
right?
But you just have to imagine the lack of everything else but yourself. So like, you know, the metaphor or the descriptor of describing that is really just the mechanics to do away with everything and try and isolate some sense of being. Now, not everyone, that's just one philosophical take on that moment.
Yeah,
it just happens to be Heidegger's, and so you can play with that. What I just thought with here is that once you get there, how you reconstitute being from that point in the imagination and into the other things, like once I started back here, but then you blossom into, reconstituting what being is going to mean for you. And that's when you can, that's where you can talk about love. And that's where you can talk about these other imaginative, metaphysical states of being that you can add to the quality.
You're talking about how you construct meaning.
How you construct meaning.
Right.
And so that's, so I saw that suite as sort of starting at that point.
The first suite or the second?
Or second suite. Yeah. Starting at that point where she's in the tank, and the tank is functioning like sensory deprivation. And that little light represents that little point of self that's in the tank that is both reflective and and self-reflective.
Right. And that image she's used in a lot of her shows.
Right. And there's a depth there, right? Like even though they're talking and playing about like, trying to avoid death, there is a death there that drops into dream. Right.
Oh, I totally agree with
Yeah.
you on that. The thing I'm compelled to ask you though is that light that's on the vest, why is it there? Like what do you think? I mean, I'm not asking you to speak for Kate Bush.
Sure.
But what do you think it's reflective? Because usually the light means save me, get me out of the water,
Right.
rescue me.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's the same? Because what I love about what we're talking about right now is it's getting very messy.
Yeah. Well,
And so, and the light piece actually simplifies while also illuminates the mess.
Yeah.
Because if you think, as I think about it, is that there's a light on the vest.
Yeah.
But then there's also, let's say, that light inside.
Right. Or the heart light or
However you want to personify it. Whereas there's that thing about a light to rescue you.
Sure.
Somebody.
Right.
Anything.
Yeah.
Save me. So how do you view that illumination piece?
Poetically and literally, both. Right. So on a literal sense, it's actually very much in keeping with the film image that she starts with there. And, and she starts with a very specific narrative. And interesting to note that although she didn't do videos back then for this song, she's since done the video, right? Yeah. So and the light's on the vest, right?
Yes,
so like
exactly.
It's the image, and now she's in the water with the light and assumingly in the dark, and the thing is, in the dark, that light versus a starlight versus it oscillates between those two worlds, between wakefulness and purpose and reaching out, and the beckoning of the reflective light in the sky that is beckoning her into dream or beckoning her into sleep. So I mean, it's got lots of poetic meanings, outside of the narrative device of it.
Yeah.
I think what's important for someone listening, if they need to get themselves to dream, they need to be brought into the narrative, right? And so they visualize this moment in the narrative and what the possibilities reveal, but then what it means for the rest of the suite as it open up, I think is a great question. Does she want to be saved? Does she need to be saved? Is this light a beacon for her or for someone else? Like what is it? I mean, we could play with that a bit.
I know there's a lot of things we've opened up in the beginning of season 2.
I'm excited about it. Yeah,
chewy and flavorful little nuggets. And that's one of the things I love about talking with you. Is that not only is it okay for me to say something incoherent, but it's also okay for me to say something that is worthy of reflection. And it goes both ways. You've given me a number of things to think about with this album.
Well, I appreciate that. I only wish, of course, as I have my notebook in front of me here, I in terms of being able to talk about this stuff, it's really interesting. How do you set up the opportunity to talk about something? I wished I would have phrased a few things a little differently, or found a way into sort of opening them up a little differently. But again, that's the dynamics of real-time conversation.
And the dynamics of, we're going to have another conversation pretty soon about a different album, so maybe that'll come up.
Maybe it'll come up, and we're probably going to have another conversation in like 3 minutes about this album. So, that's the wonderful thing about these things. And so if anyone's, listening out here, I mean, I think they know by now, neither Joël or I are trying to rue the day or win the day one way or the other. We're just unfolding. We're unfolding things as they occur and reveal themselves to us and putting them in front of each other.
Right. We've talked about how, what was it called? How did you put it? Overhyping the conversation and imagining what the conversation will be like. And here we are. And I never thought, I couldn't even imagine that we would end up where we are right now. But I think it's an amazing place to to try and put a bow
Yeah, we can.
on our conversation.
Yeah, I think so. I've very pleased to be here today,
Yes.
and we got lots of things to be planned here for season 2, and unplanned as well, and really looking forward to it. And so, as always, a pleasure, Joël. Thank you for having me in your house today.
And thanks for coming over.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. And great conversation, man.
Yes, for sure.
For sure.
Thank you.
Cheers. Wrap.